2015 is expected to be the year China's investment appetite turns to Australian farms in a big way. Everything from small properties to huge cattle stations stretching across Australia are of interest, with multi-billion-dollar Chinese investment funds lining to buy up. And right now, one Beijing-backed fund is poised to invest as much as $3 billion. It's run by a man with deep connections to Australia's political elite. Dylan Welch travelled to Victoria's dairy heartland to see how the investments are affecting small farming communities.
This is dairy country, deep in the lush rolling hills of Victoria's Gippsland region. And at dawn and dusk, every day of the year, these dairy cows make their way to Craig and Marie Aplin's milking shed. So how many cows do you have here?
At the moment we've got 122 in, but when we come into the full season we'll be milking 240.
When their cows are too old to be milked, they're sent to the abattoir next door, Tabro Meats. Last year, it was bought by a Chinese private equity firm. Craig doesn't mind the place, but hopes foreign investment is kept on a leash.
Oh, I'd still like to think that the grassroots of Australian agriculture stays with Australians, you know, as a workforce, and not only that, it's a great environment to bring up our own children.
Chinese investment in Australian agriculture started slowly. Only 140 million of the 9.5 billion invested last year was in agriculture. But with the signing of the Free Trade Agreement, 2015 is expected to be a breakthrough year. There are at least two multi-billion-dollar Chinese funds in negotiations right now for Australian businesses.
The China-Australia FTA will increase the interest of Chinese companies to start looking at some of these Australian properties and show an interest in purchasing them, because the FTA opens up new trade channels that those properties can then sell back into the Chinese market. "30 minutes north of the Aplin's farm is the hamlet of Kernot, home to about 150 people. The general store is the town's heart. Last year, Chinese company Ningbo Dairy bought a pair of adjacent Kernot farms and named them Youyu Dairy. And it was 18 months ago, you said?
Probably, yeah.
About 18 months ago,
yeah.
And how did the community react to the initial?
No reaction.
No reaction at all.
In late January this year, Ningbo unveiled plans to radically alter the farm. They wanted to double their herd size and build a bottling plant and other industrial-sized sheds. So, I mean, you live just over here.
Yes.
It's only a stone's throw from the Youyu Dairy.
Yes.
Lisa McPherson became one of the key voices in Kernot opposing the expansion. She says local concern was not about Chinese ownership.
It was purely, they didn't have answers for the effluent, they had no environmental impact statement, they had no answers for the noise emissions, the smells, where the cows were going to calve. You know, it was the application and the location that was the problem.
Last month, Youyu's plans were knocked back by the local council, but the company can appeal. Local dairy farmer John Versteden hopes the setback won't see Youyu leave the area.
About 98% of dairy farm land is owned by dairy farmers that are all Australian, and if there's a few external investors that are going to buy some of that land, I don't see that as necessarily detrimental.
One need only look at this massive expanse of land to get a sense of just how big China's Australian agricultural adventure could be. This is one cattle station among several owned by S. Kidman & Co. Last week, it was revealed a Chinese conglomerate, Pengxin, is in talks to buy it and another collection of pastoral lands for about $1 billion Australian dollars. If successful, Pengxin would own about 1% of the Australian continent.
The Pengxin bid is an interesting approach because it shows that Chinese investors might be interested in consolidating existing properties, buying up several existing Australian agribusinesses and bringing them together to exploit economies of scale and scope.
Pengxin is not the biggest investment. Beijing Capital Group is a Chinese government-owned company that formed a joint venture with Australian-based businessman Huang Chanran and his company Yuhu. Between the pair, they plan to invest as much as $3 billion in Australian agriculture.
Hi, I'm Dylan Welch from the ABC. How are you?
In June, 7:30 revealed the story behind Mr. Huang, a billionaire Chinese property developer who moved to Australia in the wake of a corruption scandal that hit a southern Chinese city in which he was active. He wasn't implicated in the case, but was close to the town's mayor, who was the target of the investigation. Since coming to Australia, Huang's donated almost $2 million to the Labor and Liberal parties and developed relationships with the who's who of Australian politics. One of his relationships is with Trade Minister Andrew Robb. Huang positioned himself well to benefit from the FTA. In September, months before it was formally agreed upon, Huang signed the multi-billion-dollar deal with Beijing Capital Group. Andrew Robb was at the signing, though he wasn't involved in making the deal. Huang and Beijing Capital have yet to make their first purchase, but when they do, it'll make a splash. Their multi-billion-dollar fund represents more than a third of all Chinese investment in Australia last year.
We do need more investment in dairy in Australia. It's certainly not a niche industry, but it's certainly a growing industry, and we need that particularly the capital investment to be able to sustain the growth that we think is possible.
Back on the Heartland farm, Craig and Marie watch the coming Chinese buy-up with some trepidation.
Are we such a cheap commodity for them to spend money out here to send it back there to make all the dollars? You know, like, you'd like to think at the end of the day we're going to have something left in Australia for all the hard work that we're doing.
What is it about dairy farming that...
Have a look. Have a look out there. And in the morning, when everyone's asleep, when you wake up and the stars are out, it's just peaceful. They lick your face. They lick. She's trying to lick my face.
Dylan Welch reporting.